Welcome to the Layman's Christianity Podcast, a practical perspective on Christian belief. Thank you so much for joining us on the Layman's Christianity Podcast today. My name is Luke, and I'm so happy you're with us. So far on this podcast, my hope has been to cover some of the major points regarding Christian belief. And I hope they've been really, really helpful and really, really important for you, really educational for you. But now I'm planning to take a different turn with what we do on this podcast. Belief is very crucial, but in order to confirm any belief, there needs to be integrity, showing a life that lives out that belief. And this is where I plan to set my focus on Christian life. Christian life may, on the outside of it, look really confusing and complicated. But to be completely honest, that is largely due to a lot of smoke from frustrated or distracted Christians who would rather nitpick about the smallest differences between each other than to move mountains. What would be a Christian's life mission? What is the common underlying current that defines the way they live? Jesus makes it very plain in the book of Mark, which is in the Bible. It's in chapter 12. A man asked him, "Which commandment is the most important of all?" And then he quotes from a much older book, also found in the Bible, called Deuteronomy, as well as Leviticus. This commandment, which has its beginnings at the very beginning of the nation of Israel, is returning to the spotlight. Jesus answers him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." So I could talk to you for hours on end talking about the smoke, the debatable points that are just nitpicking at the smallest details. And I could only go an inch deep. Can't go that deep with that subject. Or we can dwell on these two sentences and go to unfathomable depths. Every belief I've mentioned ought to be lived out by this very principle, to love God fully and to love people relentlessly. Paul, one of the keystone leaders of early Christianity, wrote about this. He said, in summary, "No matter what I accomplish, say or do or think, if I do not love, it means nothing. I gain nothing. I am nothing." Now that we see that love is a necessity for Christian belief, to mean anything really, what are some practical ways to understand how to love God fully and your neighbor as yourself? First, I want to explore our need to holistically love God. I think the best word to describe what encompasses the verse would be complete devotion. Devotion is an easy word to visualize. We've all seen athletes, writers, actors, and workers in any field, really, that posture themselves as devoted. And what's funny is that people who are devoted to something tend to reveal it in four ways: with desire, conviction, thinking, and efforts. Which is funny because that completely aligns with our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. You have to have all four to be truly devoted. We've all seen people half-heartedly devoted to something. And to be honest, it's sometimes quite pathetic. People on the hamster wheel of a dead-end job, someone on the hamster wheel or treadmill for a dead-end diet, or even a person with so much potential who lacks the desire to do it. God desires not to have half-hearted devotion. He wants our whole being to be engaged in a love for him. Now I'm going to talk about these 4 points of love. And I'm going to do it in reverse order. So I'm going to start with strength. I look at strength as posture. Where do my hands, my feet, my eyes, my mouth, and my ears go? To be truthful in my own life, when I show love to God, it usually starts here. And when I sin against God, it usually finishes and ends here. So it is important to ask this question: is the situation I'm bringing my body into a situation that would show love and honor to God? Or does it show a lack of love or honor to God? How do I talk to people? What do I look at when I'm bored or just have some extra time? What input do I listen to? Where do I go in my free time? All these questions are examples of where we use our bodies to honor God or dishonor God. Now on to our minds. How do we love God through our thinking? Good questions to ask yourself would be, what do I think about typically? Just day-to-day thoughts. How do we critically think when we're solving a problem? What knowledge am I acquiring? And how can I put it to use in a way that shows love to God? Loving God with our minds doesn't mean that we have to know all the Bible trivia or be a professor or have a master's degree in Bible study or something like that. But what's important is, how do we consider the implications of the knowledge that we learn about God? What are the implications of the knowledge we learn? Loving God with our mind is inquiry. You do not want to stop at surface level knowledge. You don't just see something and be like, oh, that's interesting, now moving on. You see something and you want to dig. You want to know more. To be loving God with your mind, you will not be satisfied with the bare minimum. And on top of this, you will begin to find ways to apply that knowledge practically. I like to think of a student. We all have been students at some point, I'm sure. Unless you're listening to this and you're younger than 4, which I really doubt. But any student, you've seen it. There's the student that just does the bare minimum to get through class, to get through the semester or the class even. And then there's the student who is enjoying what they're learning just enough that they might actually consider learning more about it and going beyond what they need to learn in order to pass the class. They want to understand everything about it. And then to some extremes, those who are really devoted students, key on the word devoted, are the people that even outside of class, even during the summer, they're looking into what they've learned and they want to learn more and they go beyond it. Maybe even one day it becomes a career, something they pursue in their work. And I think that example completely encapsulates what I'm trying to say with loving God with our mind. Now on to loving God with our soul. This one is probably the hardest to understand, especially from a standpoint of someone who doesn't necessarily believe this. But to love God with our soul means that you live a life of conviction. I would relate loving God with your soul to the term discerning or distinguishing between good and evil. When we start to apply what we learn with our mind, with loving God with our mind, we see that God is for and God is against certain things. To love God through what we discern might be uncomfortable because it means that we might have to stand against things that the culture supports, or to stand for things that the culture is against. Loving God with our soul means that you're fine-tuning your moral compass to God's design of morality. And that's the best way I could describe loving God with our soul. Loving God with our heart is next, and that one ties everything together. When we're talking about our heart metaphysically, It means our passion center. It is important to guard our emotions, but sometimes we can learn from them or use them. Am I drawn to God with passion? Do I actually adore Him? Whatever that word means to you. Do I actually cherish Him? Am I in awe of Him? Do I respect Him? Am I thankful for Him? Do I long for what He longs for? Do I hate what He hates? Am I saddened over the same things that breaks His heart? Do I love who He loves? Now that point brings me to the qualifier of everything we've talked about. Our fifth point. In order to truly love God completely, one must love your neighbor as yourself. As we saw earlier, when Jesus was saying there's two commandments, He had to love God fully, and then He had to love our neighbor as ourselves. Like Paul says, if you do not love, even my devotion to God, no matter how sincere it may seem, are mirages. They're fake. They're not full. They're not true. John, a disciple of Jesus, insisted on this reality constantly in his writings. So for the next while, I'm going to read some scattered verses that all tie this together. So I'm going to be reading from 1 John, and the verses are from chapters 3 through 4. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. Whoever does not love abides in death. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. By this we know love, that He laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. And this is His commandment, that we believe in the name of His Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as He commanded us. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. In this, the love of God has made manifest among us, that God sent His only Son into the world so that we might live through Him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son as to be the propitiation, the covering for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought to love one another. If we love one another, God abides in us, and His love is perfected in us. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. There's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because He first loved us. And this is the commandment we have had from Him. Whoever loves God must also love his brothers. Those verses I just read are some of the most meaningful, impactful verses you could ever find in the Bible. And it's funny because they are so simplistic, so straightforward. They are so important. After reading those verses, we can definitely see the urgency and the connectedness between loving God and loving our neighbor. If we are to love God, we have to love what He loves. And what He loves the most in all creation is humanity. If we love God with our strength, we will give our time, our energy to people who need it. If we love God with our minds, we will avail ourselves to people as a pool of wisdom and knowledge, whether you have great knowledge or small knowledge, so that they can draw from it at any time. If we love God with our soul, we will also be concerned with the souls of those whom we have come in contact with, praying for them and encouraging them to walk with God and not by themselves. If we love God with our hearts, our passions will be bonded with those in the world. Our hearts will hurt with people, and our hearts will be overjoyed with people. A holistic love for God means that we will also have a holistic love for people. There is absolutely no other way. As we went through all these points, I hope you were encouraged and challenged. I really, really do. It's such a simple message, but for all of us, I'm sure something hit you in a small way and in a big way. When I was preparing for this, a lot of this challenged me. If you were just here to learn, I hope that you saw the importance and the centrality of love for a Christian and how it ought to permeate everything that we believe. Well, that's all I have for today. I really hope you enjoyed listening. If you did, go ahead and like this video. If you are enjoying this podcast so far, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. More will be coming, and I look forward to having you with us again. Thank you for listening.